Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Today in True Crime and Portraits podcast. I'm your host, Jane Flowers. Today's date is November the 11th, 2020, and it is Veterans Day. Happy Veterans Day, everyone. I want to express today on Veterans Day honor and appreciation to all who have served in the military. Thank you for your service. On today's true crime episode, I will be speaking about my father's career as a dentist in the U.S. Navy and his unsolved murder that has been spoken about with photography taken by photographer William Eggleston. Also, in today's episode, I am reviewing a YouTube video that was published on January the 3rd, 2020 by an Army veteran that goes by the name of Robert. His channel on YouTube is called Photography 111. And the YouTube video that I'm reviewing that he published that speaks about my father's life and unsolved murder and comments towards me is called Location of the Red Ceiling, William Eggleston. I noticed his YouTube video in February of 2020 this year on YouTube, and afterwards I reached out to Robert and commented on his video he posted on his channel about how he was spreading lies about my father's life and unsolved murder. I don't think he cared that he was spreading lies, and he actually went into great length justifying why he could talk about my father's life and unsolved murder, regardless if I thought he was fabricating it. He went into great lengths in his comments towards me, telling me how he knew so much about my father's life and unsolved murder as if he knew more than I did. For example, he told me that my father's dental office that Tom opened up in Greenwood, Mississippi in the 50s was actually opened up May of 1957. I knew that this man was not acting like he cared about my father's life and unsolved murder, so I did not argue with him in the comments on his channel. I mostly let him speak and put his foot in his mouth, meaning I let him speak so he could say things that I knew I could come back and say, hey, how did you know this is true? Because actually, this is the fact right here. And here's where he was lying about my father's life. My father did not open up his dental office in May of 1957. My father opened up his dental office on November 13th, 1957. I speak about my father opening up his dental office in his biography called The True Legacy of Dr. Tom Boring on page 59. This is what I said about my father opening up his dental office in his biography. Then, in the following month of November, Tom was ready to announce the opening of his dental clinic. That month, the Greenwood Commonwealth posted an article in their paper and announced the opening of Dr. Thomas C. Boring's dental office at 301 and a half Howard Street with the phone number 601-453-4284. Robert had to instill in me over and over and over again how he meant no wrong about lying about my father's life and unsolved murder, regardless if he didn't see it as lying. He wanted me to know that Maud Schuler Clay, William Eggleston's cousin, and her husband, Langdon Clay, told him stuff about my dad and his unsolved murder that I have seen on his YouTube channel, and he's just repeating what was told to him. In the YouTube video, you see him showing people the empty lot where my father's home was once standing at 103 Virginia Street in Greenwood, Mississippi, while talking about how my father was murdered and the photos that William took of him and my father, such as the photo untitled Greenwood, Mississippi, 1973. Tom's home completely burned down, and Robert's going to walk around on the lot where it once stood talking to people on his YouTube video, telling people this is where the photo, the red ceiling, was taken by William Eggleston. It is not where the photo, untitled Greenwood, Mississippi, 1973, and formerly known as the red ceiling, was taken by William Eggleston. The photo was taken at 508 MacArthur Street in Greenwood, Mississippi. This is a fact. William Eggleston begs to differ where this photo was taken, and so does Robert, because Robert is going by what William and his family have claimed and told him. It doesn't matter what I have to say. It's my father. I have all of his military records. I would know when he went into the military and what he did during his time in the military more than any other person that is not a blood relative to him. Robert wants to tell me my father was in the Korean War. My father never went to the Korean War. He did join the Navy January 13th, 1949, but he was not in the Korean War during the time when he joined the Navy. I speak about this in my father's biography when he went into the Navy on page 12, and because I have all of his military records, I was able to list in detail in his biography what he did while serving in the U.S. Navy. The Korean War started June 25, 1950, when North Korea was pushing into South Korea, and the war ended July 27, 1953. My father was going to college to study to become a dentist in the fall of 1950 during the time of the Korean War. Tom was in college during this time at Ole Miss University in Oxford, Mississippi, studying to become a dentist. The first two chapters in my father's biography, I mostly talk about Tom's service in the United States Navy. The third chapter of my father's biography starts in the fall of 1952 on page 31. In this chapter, I speak about the Korean War. The Korean War ended July 27, 1953, when my father was going to dental school at Loyola University in New Orleans. And on September the 10th, 1953, my father was honorably discharged from the United States Navy. He served 4 years in the U.S. Navy, but during this time he never went to the Korean War because he was in school studying to become a dentist. But Robert wants to try to instill in my mind that he and William Eggleston and Maud Schuler Clay know more about my father than I do. He's going to tell me that my father's tombstone at his gravesite even says that he was in the Korean War. I have seen my father's tombstone, and what Robert is talking about inscribed on top of it, I'm not sure how and when this was put there. All I know is I will be removing that tombstone and putting another one down as soon as I'm able to afford that, because the one that is currently placed over his grave site is misleading to people, and it needs to be removed. Instead, I'm going to say on Tom's tombstone that he was in the United States Navy as a dentist from 1949 to 1972, and he was lieutenant commander. I'm not happy with my father's tombstone that misleads people about his life. With all the lies that have been said over the years about my father's life and unsolved murder, I would even go as to say that this tombstone is not his original tombstone. It could have been placed there over the past decade or so. Anything is possible with these people, because this is how they're making money off my father's life, is by making up all these lies and trying to stick these lies to my father's life and unsolved murder. I call it juicing up his murder. Murder sells. Essentially, he's trying to make money off my father's murder. William Eggleston, that is, and anyone else that's trying to sell his bullshit he tries to feed people about my father's life and unsolved murder. Regardless of what I have to say about my father's life and unsolved murder, people are still going to differ when it comes to my claim dealing with his life and unsolved murder. It's not an unusual occurrence for people to tell me they know more about my father's life and unsolved murder than I do. I get this quite often from people. They come at me like I'm straight up crazy, and they need to educate me about my father's life and unsolved murder. So I decided to write my father's biography to educate people about his life and unsolved murder that has been slandered and fabricated all over the world for someone else's benefit and gain. Robert went as far in the comments on his channel as to tell me that maybe the disinformation that I'm getting with my father's life and unsolved murder is actually coming from all the newspaper articles that are written about him. I was able to find over 100 newspaper articles about my father's life and unsolved murder from the 1930s up to the 1980s. In my opinion, I don't think the newspaper is going to be spreading lies like a magazine would or a YouTube video would. Newspapers record history, and we would be lost without newspaper articles. I shared 45 newspaper articles in my father's biography about his life and unsolved murder. I trust those newspaper articles more than I do any current magazine article that speaks about my father's life and unsolved murder from William Eggleston's point of view. There are no police reports about my father's unsolved murder because they were burned up in a Greenwood, Mississippi fire around 2016. So naturally, I would go by newspaper articles that were spoken about my father's unsolved murder if I need to know what happened during that time when he was murdered. Without these newspaper articles, people would be lost. And newspaper articles are actually very informative when it comes to anything dealing with history. Robert's remarks towards me about newspaper articles are the ones that are misleading me is just another way for him to try to back up his claim. They're not trying to mislead me. I know this. Do you? Like I said before on my first podcast episode, William Eggleston and his family refused to speak to me about my father's life and unsolved murder. They have good reason not to want to speak to me, because they have been spreading lies and making money off of fabricating and slandering my father's life and unsolved murder for their benefit. They haven't stopped spreading their lies, and they're not going to stop. People are not going to stop coming up to me and telling me I'm wrong about my father's life and unsolved murder. People are not going to stop coming up to me and telling me, oh, William Eggleston's right, Jane, and you just need to shut up and let him speak and let him spew his lies about your father's life and unsolved murder because you don't know your head from your ass. I do know my head from my ass. And I know that that man is making millions while fabricating my father's life in unsolved murder next to nude photos of him that he took in a home that was once located at 508 MacArthur Street. The Greenwood Commonwealth newspaper put an article out on my father and his home that was once located at 508 MacArthur Street. The newspaper article is dated January 31st, 1970, and it was published by the Greenwood Commonwealth. I speak about this article on page 85 of my father's biography. You can see and read the whole article and my father's biography if you are curious and want to see for yourself. In the article, it details what was inside of the photographs that you see in William Eggleston's photograph called Untitled, Greenwood, Mississippi, 1973, and two other photographs that he has said were taken at 103 Virginia Street. These two other photographs are called Untitled T.C. Boring, 1972, Greenwood, Mississippi, by photographer William Eggleston, and Untitled T.C. Boring, early 70s, in his bedroom, Greenwood, Mississippi, by photographer William Eggleston. Also, I speak about the photo Untitled, Greenwood, Mississippi, 1973, and how it was taken at my father's home on page 104 of my father's biography. There are 9 fine art photographs that I speak about in my father's biography that William Eggleston took of my father and his home in the early 70s. These photos were mostly taken at 508 MacArthur Street in Greenwood, Mississippi. Regardless if I tell you and everyone else how I know my father lived his life and where he was murdered, this doesn't matter because William Eggleston has over the decades published in his films and books and at his portrait exhibitions lies about my father's life and unsolved murder for money. People would rather believe him than me because he's famous and the godfather of color photography, and I'm not. All of the people that keep talking about my father's life and unsolved murder, slandering how he lived his life and how he was murdered, are not going to stop talking about him and fabricating his life and unsolved murder until they are brought to justice and are indicted on charges of slander and libel. Believe me, I have reached out to quite a few attorneys about my father's life and unsolved murder that is being slandered and fabricated for millions by a fine art photographer, namely William Eggleston. But not one attorney wants to take my case on contingency, and I don't have $5,000 or $10,000 to put towards my case. So here I am trying to get the truth out about my father's life and unsolved murder to everyone who will listen. Please stay tuned for more true crime stories with episodes dropping daily. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe and leave a comment. Until then, I'll see you next episode. Bye, everyone.